Hello, and thanks for joining me or rejoining me for some more Victorian humour. Today taken from London Humorous Readings, a book by Mr. Henry Lloyd, apparently a famous reciter. I'm going to read the second of these. Apparently these were published in order that other people could read them out loud, I suspect, in penny readings. There's no date in this book, but there is a dedication written in the front: to Dad, with best wishes from Cecil, Christmas 1909. So if it's not Victorian, it's Edwardian, really, I suppose. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the second of these readings from this book.
London Humorous Readings, Number 2. A Romantic Young Man. I trust you will understand that these revelations are strictly private. It is necessary that you should consider them so and act accordingly, or otherwise I may find myself before long in durance vile, or, in other words, in the lock-up. I have not knowingly committed any crime, but I certainly have laid myself open to a somewhat serious charge, of which you shall hear more presently. A few words concerning myself and my mode of thought will enable you to understand and appreciate to their full extent the incident I am about to relate. Without this look into my character, you might be inclined to set me down as weak-witted, and I should not like you to have that impression. It would be a reflection on my audience as well as myself. On the talker for standing up with all the daring of a brainless noodle to address a sensible audience, and on the part of the supposed sensible audience to waste its time in listening to the nonsensical ravings of an idiot. Here is a good rule to follow, not only in my case, but in thousands of other instances. Not only would it often save you losing temper, but if the study of man is a pleasure to you, the rule I speak of would give you many hours of delightful recreation and surprise. Here is the rule. When a strange and altogether out of the way deed is done, do not try to understand the deed in the first place, but try to understand the doer of it. Begin thus always, and much that seems dark will be made light to you. I have then, let it be known, a romantic side to my character. This takes the form of always wanting to help someone, to be of service to the weak, to stand up as a champion for those in distress, etc. This, you will admit, I doubt not, is a good trait in a man's character if it be kept within proper limits. My friends, who smile at my sometime mishaps, tell me that not only do I not keep this trait within proper limits, but that I do not keep it within limits at all, but let it go unchained and without a muzzle on, to work on its own will as wildly and widely as it chooses. Need I say my friends are wrong? They simply look at the deed and not the doer. I ought to know, for being the doer myself, and being well acquainted with myself, who is there that can take a fairer view of the deed from the doer's standpoint than myself? I admit that sometimes my imagination leads me astray, and that in many instances I am purposely deceived by those persons I am doing my best to aid. These are the two rocks, on one or both of which I occasionally come to grief. I came to grief over my imagination no longer than 4 days ago, and I will relate the incident. I was making the best of my way home about 10:30 on the night referred to, when my attention was arrested by a painful spectacle. The hour was late, as I have already observed, and the street through which I was passing was nearly deserted. The houses were small villas with front gardens, so called. The gardens were of about sufficient size for a tall, large man to lie down in without feeling that he was crowded. It will be seen, therefore, that the street door was but a very little way from the pavement, and in full view of every passer-by. To the door was one doorstep, and no more. I am particular in pointing out these details, partly that you may understand the incident I am about to relate, and partly to show how cool, calm and collected I must have been to notice what would seem to some minds insignificant facts. I may mention, too, that it was rather a dark night with a strong wind blowing, which made it more difficult to determine anything by sight and hearing so unerringly as one might have done had the night been calm and light. The painful spectacle just referred to was this. In the open doorway stood a fierce-looking elderly man. Rough hair and a long beard were blown wildly about by the wind and probably made him look fiercer than usual. Hatless and coatless, he loomed large, dark and savage, made plain by a dim light which burned probably in the kitchen at the rear of the house. An apparition like this, without further accompaniment, would certainly not have stayed my steps. But on the cold stones in the garden was a woman, a young woman, on her knees. In one moment, imagination revealed the whole story to me. 'Twas the old tale. A loving girl, a stern father, a lover not liked by the old man, secret correspondence, stolen interviews, two fond breaking hearts, the refuge of the despairing, an elopement and marriage. Now I could picture the husband out of work and ill, the agonised daughter compelled to try and make peace with the sullenly brooding parent, his fierce denunciation of her wickedness and savage refusal to forgive. I heard him cry in a stern voice, "Lower, girl, lower," as he pointed to the earth. On her knees was not sufficient. She must prostrate herself at his brutal feet and kiss the very ground before he would utter a word of forgiveness. Was it in human nature to stand this? It was not in mine. Entering the garden, I placed my arms round her fragile form to raise her from the earth, speaking at the same time some words of sympathy. The old man stepped hurriedly forward, but by a vigorous thrust of my arm I sent him staggering. To my amazement, he sat down in what I now perceived was a large iron pail. As I said to the distressed lady, "Take courage, take courage," she suddenly disengaged herself from my grasp and said, "Take that, you impudent fellow," and at the same moment dashed into my face a large house flannel laden with hearthstone and evil odours. I thought they might have given me time to get the hearthstone out of my eyes and mouth before they commenced investigations, but they did not. The old man had me by the collar and the young woman had me by the hair, and I can assure you there never was a romantic young man who had the romance shaken out of him quicker than I did on that eventful occasion. It didn't struggle and go by degrees. It went in the bulk, and it went quicker than a person can wink once. "What do you mean by it?" yelled the broken-hearted daughter, pulling me half over by my hair. "Hey, what do you mean by it?" roared the stern parent, as he fetched me up to the perpendicular and then gave me a pull over his side by my collar. "Getting hold of a respectable girl round the neck," sobbed the lady, fetching me over again to her side. "And knocking a respectable ratepayer into his own pail," growled the gentleman, recovering my body and reasserting his right to have it on his side in the practical manner already described. I could say nothing while things were going on like this, so quietly waited events. If I struggle, I thought, she'll have my head and he'll have my body, and my end won't be peace, but pieces. A policeman coming up saved me from absolute dismemberment, but placed me in an awkward position. The man and maid were for giving me in charge for a brutal and wanton assault, but I begged their pardon so earnestly and gave my address so readily that I was allowed to go. It appears the girl was hearthstoning the step, and the old man was directing her to go lower down with the hearthstone. That was all. I have, however, received a summons and shall have to go before the magistrate tomorrow to explain matters. I only hope he'll believe me and let me off with paying a fine. Even then, it does seem hard for a being animated with the best intentions to have to suffer on account of his intense desire to do good to those in affliction and help those in distress. I found, too, when I got home, that I'd lost a tooth. It had been slightly loose for some days, and I presume it was dragged from its anchorage by that abominable house flannel. Without, I spat it out in mistake for a piece of hearthstone. It was a favourite maxim of one of my old aunts, keep everything in its place. I suppose she would have included teeth, for out of their place they are quite valueless. My good old aunt I refer to gave me quite an early check to my taste for the romantic. Something having offended me when I was very young, I formed a deep and dark resolve to run away to sea. I put all my money, threepence halfpenny I think it was, in my pocket and started. I hadn't any clear idea of where the sea was, but having learned at school that England was surrounded by it, I thought it didn't matter which way I went. I did literally run for about a quarter of a mile, and then I met my aunt. Naturally enough, she stopped me to inquire why I was so far away from home and why I was running. Was any one or thing, dog, bull or beggar after me? Defiantly, I raised my small head and explained matters. I made no attempt to deceive her. She listened, then catching me by the collar, she gave me a sound thwacking with her umbrella and sent me running off home faster than I ran from it. Here is an account of the serious matter I referred to earlier. Some 18 months back I was on my road home from a pleasant family gathering that had been prolonged till some time after midnight. As I passed through a deserted street with tall houses on each side, I perceived in a doorway a youngish-looking man vainly endeavouring to open the street door. I say vainly because at the moment I came up, I heard him give an impatient ejaculation as if he should say, "Oh, bother it." With my usual desire to help humanity in difficulties, I said pleasantly, "Can't you get in?" He looked at me with some alarm, and I thought suspicion on his face, so I hastened to reassure him by telling him that he need have no fear of me, as I was a perfectly respectable man and only paused out of a desire to be of service to him, if I possibly could. He appeared to reflect for a moment, as if considering whether it would be judicious to trust me, then said, "It's like this, sir. My uncle, staying for the present at Brighton, is the owner of this house. I came up by the last train at his request to obtain certain articles for him, as he is going to give rather a grand party and wants everything to be very nice. On my arrival in London, I found that I had neglected to bring the door key. I have a friend in London, however, who is an amateur locksmith, and he has kindly obliged me with the loan of a bunch of skeleton keys. As you see, however, I cannot make much headway with them, and I really don't know what to do. I want to get the things and be off by the first train in the morning, for the party is to come off at midday tomorrow." "Let me try," I said, for the young man appeared to be in great distress at being kept out of the family mansion in the cold night air. He handed me the keys, and to my great delight I opened the door quite easily in a few seconds. "You may come in, sir," he said, and out of curiosity I followed him. He closed the door in the dark, and taking a small bull's-eye lantern out of his pocket, struck a lucifer and so got a light. "I put this in my pocket," said he, referring to the lantern, "because I knew I should not be here till after dark, and so provided myself with means to see. What Uncle wants, continued the young fellow confidentially to me as we found our way upstairs, is some of the silver plate and the family jewels. Aunt is a very handsome woman, but likes plenty of rich ornament. I think she said the jewels were in the top drawer in the best bedroom. It's so long since I was in this house that I almost forget the run of it. I spend most of the summer on Uncle's yacht. We now entered a very handsomely furnished bedroom. The young man took a quick glance round and said, "Yes, I remember now. Top drawer. Keys in the Japanese tray. There's the tray." This was true. The tray was there, but there were no keys in it. This was unfortunate. The skeleton keys were found to be of no avail. The young fellow mused a moment, then remarked with a sigh, "It's unfortunate, but I daren't go back without the things. I suppose I must use my iron walking stick." From an inner pocket he now produced a short iron stick with which he forced open the top drawer. He looked disappointed, for there was an entire absence of jewellery there. He reflected, then remarked, "I must have made a mistake. Aunt may have said the one next to the top. Anyway, I shall try it," and straightway the drawer was forced open. I did not like to see a handsome piece of furniture spoiled, but reflected that it was a matter between the young man and his uncle, and so said nothing. The young man looked happy now, for he found sufficient to make his aunt look quite imposing. I could not make out exactly what the articles were, for he tumbled them, as I thought, very carelessly into an inner pocket, but I could see the flashing of gold and diamonds and pearls and precious stones, and wondered much at his not taking greater care of them. We now found our way downstairs and managed with a little trouble to get open the door of the butler's pantry. "The spoons and forks are all I shall require from this department," said the young man, "though, by the way, the butler did ask me if I minded bringing him his gold watch and chain, and I said not a bit, so I may as well take it." And he at once secured the article named, which had been left hanging on a peg. The spoons and forks, too, he rolled up tightly in 2 or 3 handkerchiefs he had brought with him. One thing did strike me at the time as being peculiar. The young fellow seemed all pockets. As there happened to be a decanter of port in the pantry, the young man kindly poured me out a glass and helped himself, and we drank to the health of one another and of his uncle and aunt, and success to the party that was to come off a few hours afterwards. "Let me have a look out into the street first," said the young fellow as he extinguished his light and secreted the lantern in one of his pockets. "Sometimes policemen are very officious if they see you leaving a house in the small hours." I said, "Yes, so they are." Once outside, we said good night pleasantly, and I went home quite satisfied. Imagine my horror when, 3 or 4 days after, I read that a burglary had been committed at this very house while the family were away. Jewellery, plate, and the butler's watch were all mentioned. I really thought I should have gone crazy. Night and day I was in a perpetual fever of apprehension. The idea of being suddenly seized and put to trial for burglary. I imagined my name figuring in the papers as a burglar's assistant, an amateur housebreaker, and so on. If I passed a policeman, I did so in fear and trembling, and if I met one coming in the opposite direction, I was ready to collapse. For a long time I got home early and knocked at the door or rung to be let in. The operation of inserting my latchkey in the keyhole and letting myself into the dim hall gave me fits like the ague. As time passes, I begin to feel somewhat easier, but I trust you quite understand this incident is told in the strictest confidence. There is another matter, too, which gives me at the present time a great deal of mental trouble and promises to give me in the future even thicker and hotter doses of it. I trust you will not deem me lacking in good taste in relating this episode in my career, because it concerns a lady. If you study the most interesting episodes in the lives of most men, you will usually find a lady in the case. About 12 months ago, it was necessary for me to take a railway journey. I proceeded to the station, visited the booking office, and bought my ticket. Could I but have foreseen at that moment the danger I was going into, I should have torn my ticket up and walked the 20 miles I was anxious to cover. I saw no danger, however, and stepped into a carriage. On the opposite seat in one corner sat a fine-looking old gentleman. Snowy hair and flowing white beard imparted a dignity to him that was most pleasing to contemplate. On his face, however, was so stern an expression that he might have been painted as a judge, giving a bit of his mind to some criminal about 75% worse than the usual run. Following the glance of his eagle eye, my gaze became fixed on the occupant of the other corner of the seat whereon he sat. We three had the compartment to ourselves, so that I felt something like an occupant of one of the front row of stalls at a theatre, and the other seat became the stage, and those on it the actors. The old gentleman's travelling companion was a lady, a young lady, and it needed only one glance on my part to detect the fact that they were father and daughter. The young lady was tall and graceful, and I must admit very beautiful, but there was a similar expression on her face to the expression on the face of her parent. Of course, it was modified by her youthful appearance, but for all that, I think I never saw a young lady look so fierce. They were looking straight at each other. Had they looked straight at me, each from their corners, as they were looking at each other, I should have fled the scene. Of that there can be no doubt. "Eleanor," said the old gentleman presently, without the slightest modification of his stern gaze, "you are wrong, I tell you, you are wrong." "Father," replied the young lady in tones that were almost tragic, "I am not wrong, I am right, it is you who are wrong." And they continued to glare. "Sir," said the old gentleman, "I will appeal to you." This was to me, and he turned his gaze on me as he spoke. I felt a bit frightened, but gathered courage when I perceived that he'd put aside his dreadful glare and frown and was beaming benevolently on me. I ventured then to look at the lady. Her severe look had got itself blown out of the window, and she was looking as pleasant as her parent. "I am quite willing," she laughed, "provided the gentleman will give good authority for his decision." I at once professed my utmost willingness and readiness, should it be in my power to act as judge, but I mentally resolved to say nothing to offend either of my companions, if I could, by artfulness of any description, avoid doing so. To my delight, I was enabled to please both and offend neither. "This is the question which has caused the breach," said the father solemnly. "There is a small shellfish called the mussel. The question is, how is the word spelled? I say," and here a twinkle of the old fierceness came into the father's left eye, "the spelling should run thus, Mussel. "And I say," cried the daughter with a defiant toss of her dainty head, "the spelling should run thus, Muscle. And now, sir." This "now, sir" was a duet, and I felt for a moment that I daren't look up, but there was a delightful feeling of conscious strength and power in my bosom, for I felt that I knew what I knew. It did so happen that I had been asked this question before and had gone into the matter, so I felt like the boy with the loaded garden squirt waiting for the cat to come round the corner. I was ready. "Dr. Johnson," I opened oracularly, "spells it Muscle. Nuttall spells it Muscle, but adds sometimes spelt Mussel, while Bailey in an old edition says Muscle or Mussel, and leaves you to take your choice." "Thank you, sir," cried the old man, and "Thank you, sir," said the girl. And then the two shook hands and asked each other's forgiveness and forgave each other and then kissed affectionately, and there that matter ended. I certainly felt very much astonished at my adventure, and had I not been a romantic young man, should probably have put my companions down as a couple of lunatics. Many a time, and often since, have I heartily wished that I had done so and declined all further conversation. "This is how it is," said the old gentleman presently, addressing me. "Eleanor, my daughter here, and myself differ on nearly everything and every question under the sun. We are both obstinate, and our lives are made miserable in consequence. What can we do? This is the 10th time we have quarrelled today." "The 11th," came solemnly from the girl. "The 10th, I say," shouted the father with his dreadful frown. "The 11th, father," said the daughter firmly, and fetching up the optical glare. "You forget the sandwiches, perhaps." "I do, my girl, you are right, your hand. Forgive me, etc." The old man explained about the sandwiches to me. It was a small matter, as he said, but what troubled him was the continual jarring. He asked me to advise him, or both of them, if I could. He appeared to think, because I had settled one question satisfactorily, that I was the right person to appeal to. The position I was asked to undertake was not a pleasant one. It would necessitate me lecturing both my companions, and a young man to start reprimanding venerable age and a blushing beauty at a minute's notice would certainly require a great deal of assurance. Not liking, however, to seem disagreeable, I put my thoughts in a mild form and clothed them in a few words. Said I to the young lady, "Age has its rights, miss," and then to the old man, "And so has youth." They both nodded. "Respect is always due to a parent, miss." Then to the old man, "And forbearance is due to a child." They nodded again. My object was to play them one against the other. I went on again. "The young lady's obstinacy is probably inherited from her father, and he must take part of her share of blame. But," and here I hurried up, having hit the old man, "with the continual warning of her father's example, the young lady should ever strive to avoid becoming like him. The lady's obstinacy, being of the same stock, inflames and irritates the parent's fount. So the young lady must take part of her father's blame." They both nodded once more, and I felt pleased at having balanced matters so well. "I have only one piece of advice," I concluded. "Whatever question crops up, state each your belief, then let the matter be noted in your notebooks. This having been done, one of you move the adjournment of the debate and the other second it. This will give you time to look up your authorities, so each matter will settle itself." There is perhaps nothing in this world which contains so many of the elements of deception as human vanity. I was actually flattering myself that I had done the very thing I ought to have done, and that I had done it so well that neither myself nor anyone else could have done it better. Possibly I had, up to the point mentioned, supposing our conversation and acquaintanceship had ceased there and then forevermore, but it did not so happen, and therefore time spent in conjecturing what might have been is time wasted. Looking at things now, I can plainly see that I should have been a happier man today if I had simply advised this eccentric couple just to fight it out. It would not have been gentlemanly on my part, perhaps not absolutely moral, but it would probably have put an end to all friendly amenities, and I should have seen no more of my acquaintances. When I got out at my station, we had grown quite friendly. The old gentleman and myself had exchanged cards, and I had promised to pay him a visit. I paid the promised visit a week later, and found my friends located in a charming house. We had a very comfortable dinner. In addition to the old gentleman and the daughter, there was a great tall fellow, Eleanor's cousin. He made the fourth. The old gentleman was a widower. It came out in the course of conversation that the tall cousin was engaged to the young lady, and it did not take me long to discover that he was of a very jealous disposition. He was civil and all that, but it was evident that he did not like me. I ought to blush to say it, but truth is truth, and I think on the whole I was rather better looking than him, though much shorter. I should not have ventured into the subject of the disagreements betwixt my host and his daughter had they not introduced it. Of course, then I was compelled to, and asked how the notebooks answered. "Very nicely," said the young lady, "or they would if Pa was not so continuously mislaying his." "Continuously?" growled the father. "Twice only twice." "5 times, Pa," cried the daughter. "Twice!" shouted the old man, banging the table with his fist so that the plates jumped. The young lady very coolly produced her notebook and read aloud the dates when the parental diary went astray. But the old man would have none of it. He had the dates down, he knew, and he commenced to hunt fiercely in pocket after pocket, but lo, the wandering book had gone again. The daughter made another entry in her book, and the matter was allowed to end there. All this time the tall cousin was looking like a thundercloud. Presently he said, "I should think, uncle, these scenes might be avoided in the presence of strangers." "This gentleman is no stranger," said the old man gruffly. "I am proud to call him a friend." "And so am I," brightly cried the young lady. "He has indeed proved a good friend and given us good advice. I wish Pa would only act up to it." "There you go again," growled Pa. "Your temper is really abominable. Why do you sneer?" "I did not sneer, sir." "You did, miss." "Oh, for mercy's sake, do stop it," cried the black-looking cousin. "It is really dreadful." The old man turned red and the young lady turned white. I wished myself well out of the family party, for I felt a storm was about to burst, and I did not feel like giving any more philosophical advice just then. I made my excuses, lateness of the hour, train to catch, etc., and only breathed freely when I found myself in the open air. After this I became a pretty regular visitor, and it soon grew clear to my mind that I was getting greatly interested in the daughter. Then it began to dawn on me that I was getting extremely fond of her society, and then I was obliged to confess it to myself. I loved her. The tall cousin looked blacker and blacker every time we met. Then one evening I learned from the old man that there had been a quarrel between Eleanor and her lover, and the engagement was broken off. Here was news for a romantic young man in love. I do not care to go into details here. Let it suffice to say that I told her of my affection, and that she blushingly confessed that it was returned. I was very happy for a time. Then things changed. Eleanor left off quarrelling and disagreeing with her father and elected me in his place to deal with. Then the old man would offer me his notebook, the notebook I had recommended. I trembled for the future. As days went by, her aggravating habit grew worse, and as that grew worse, my affection for her waned and at length died out. Now I was left with an aggravating engagement to keep, for not only verbally, but by many loving letters, had I promised to make her mine. Suddenly light dawned. The black-looking cousin was after all to prove my benefactor. I received the following note from him. "Sir, I understand you are engaged to my cousin Eleanor, that is, engaged to be married. I need not waste ink to tell you what I think of you. I really do not know how to classify you without danger of giving offence to some innocent and possibly worthy animal or reptile. I, however, write to say that if you do not immediately abandon your claim to the hand of my cousin, I shall, within 7 days of the present date, give myself the pleasure of breaking your dastardly neck. 7 days? Why, within 7 minutes I had written to say that it gave me great pleasure to be able to oblige him, and within 5 minutes more the letter was posted. Here was the very excuse I wanted. I also wrote to Miss Eleanor, breaking the news gradually, informing her of her cousin's intention, and pointing out that a husband with a broken neck would be neither use nor ornament. Finally, I set her free to marry, if she were so minded, her cousin. The only reply I received was from her father's solicitor, informing me of the lady's intention to sue me for breach of promise. So at present matters stand thus with me. I can either let the breach of promise case come on or finish my career with a broken neck. A pleasant choice, truly. In addition to this, I have to appear before a magistrate to give good reasons for assaulting a maidservant and knocking a householder into a pail, while I go in daily fear of being arrested as an amateur burglar, and all through being a romantic young man.